Okay, good morning again, and happy holiday. Today we're in the middle of the holiday of Sukkot, or Sukkot, depending on your pronunciation. It's the season of rejoicing, and there are many different rituals associated with this day. The one that you're seeing over here, the four kinds, the four species, I discussed it a little bit last week. I just want to discuss it a little bit more and tie it in with what we're learning in Maimonides.
Right.
In the Torah, there's a commandment that on this holiday, we take four different plants, four different species. It doesn't say what to do with it. That was transmitted in the oral law. It just says take it to yourself. So we take four species. We'll start off with this one. This is the Etrog, or the Etrog. It looks like a lemon, a big oversized lemon, but it's not a lemon. It's very different from a lemon. It has totally different taste, different fragrance, and it grows mostly in the Mediterranean area. Israel, Italy, Greece, Morocco, and so on. And we take this fruit. The Torah doesn't call it an esrog. That's actually Aramaic translation of it. The Hebrew word for it is hadar, which means beautiful. The fruit of a beautiful tree, or the beautiful fruit of the tree. Now, if someone would have just read the Bible and read that, I'm sure if I'd asked 100 people, if you had to describe a beautiful fruit, this would not come into your choices. Everyone would probably have a different choice because we're all different. So we have what appears to us as beautiful may appear to someone else as not being so beautiful. But this is what the Torah, this was transmitted in the oral tradition. And this is a subject that I want to refer to over and over again, because that's the basis of Maimonides' teachings, that Judaism is based on two pillars: the biblical, the written text, but the written text is unintelligible without commentary, because the Torah was given as an outline of what God wants us to do. But the bulk of the teachings of Judaism, which is really an interpretation of all the commandments, were preserved in the oral tradition. Now, this oral tradition didn't remain oral. Eventually, it was put into writing in the Talmud, Midrash, and other classical works. So in the classical works of Judaism, which contain the oral traditions, this is the definition of a beautiful fruit. It's a fruit that has some very exquisite qualities. Number one quality is that the tree, the bark of the tree, has the same taste as the fruit. There's a certain consistency. I never tried biting off the bark to confirm that, but that's what it says in the Talmud, that it has the same taste, and that's a symbol of consistency. The way I would interpret it is that the tree is the means and the fruit is the end. You plant a fruit-bearing tree to get fruit. If it doesn't bear fruit, you don't need the tree. But very often in our lives, the end and the means are not synonymous. We sometimes resort to things that are negative because we have a good objective in the end. You have all this in all political parties and all religions. You have people who will do terrible things saying, well, my objective is good, and it may very well be good, but the means doesn't reflect the good of the final outcome. So when you have a tree that has the same taste, a similar taste to the fruit, what does that mean? It means this is perfection. That's the ideal perfection of what we want in society. We want people to pursue righteousness with righteousness. In the Torah, you have in Deuteronomy, tzedek, tzedek, tirtov. Righteousness, righteousness you shall pursue. If you look in the English translations, it doesn't tell you the real translation. It's a repetitive expression, and one meaning of that is that when you want to pursue righteousness, pursue it with righteousness. Don't resort to all sorts of criminal behavior as they did in communist countries and other regimes, and sometimes even in our own country. We pursue good ends with the wrong means. So this is has a moral perfection to it. That's one thing about this fruit. Another thing about this fruit is that it thrives in all 4 seasons. That means it unifies all 4 seasons. Usually, for some plants, one season is a conflict to the growth of the fruit, but here there's no conflict. It's an expression of total peace. So, and there are many other qualities associated with this fruit, and this fruit is one of the 4 species. The other one of the 4 species is the lulav, the palm branch. The palm branch, I mentioned this last week, is a symbol of tenacity, a backbone, someone who doesn't bend, who doesn't yield. But another thing I forgot to mention about the etrog is that it has a taste. It used to be a delicacy. I don't know if anyone still eats it. It used to be a delicacy. Kings would serve it at their tables. But it also has a beautiful fragrance. And here's where we come into Maimonides. What is the meaning of taste? See, in Hebrew, the word for taste, tam, which is also in Yiddish. If some of you know any Yiddish, you'll know if some food tastes good, you'll say, es hat a guten tam, it has a good taste. But the word taste also means reason. Reason has to resonate with you. If something is not reasonable, it doesn't resonate. It doesn't sound comfortable to hear certain things that are not reasonable. So this has good taste, which means it symbolizes reason. Maimonides focused so much on reason. But it also has a good fragrance. Fragrance is something that doesn't stay in one place. It wafts, it spreads. That's a person who has good deeds. A person who has good deeds is someone whose reputation will spread far and wide. So we take this fruit, which symbolizes a perfection, someone who has knowledge, reason, and also good deeds. That's the ideal human being. That's the human being that Maimonides is talking about when he talks about the proper attitudes. And he refers to the section of proper attitudes as proper ideas, because your attitudes have to become influenced by your proper ideas, and they have to be translated into good deeds, into good behavior. The lulav, on the other hand, this comes from a date palm. Date palms have taste. Dates have taste. They're very sweet, but no fragrance. That refers to people who are more into the intellect, but not so much into action, into translating their ideas into behavior. Doesn't mean they're bad people. They're just like professors. Am I offending any professors here? Well, I'm a retired professor, so I could offend professors because I'm offending myself as well. They live in an ivory tower. They focus on scholarly behavior, scholarly pursuits, but they're not into doing things for the rest of society directly. Indirectly, they may very well be providing the rational basis for that type of behavior. Then you have the leaves called myrtles. In Hebrew, they're called Hadassim. Ever heard the woman's name Hadassah? Well, that means myrtle. These myrtles come from a tree that has fragrance, but no taste. There are people who are not very sophisticated intellectually, but they're very sophisticated socially. These are good people, but not people who are steeped in knowledge. Then there's the 4th category, the willows. The willows have no knowledge, no taste, and no fragrance. What kind of people are they? Simple people who are not very active socially, and they're not active intellectually. And our community is divided into these 4 categories. And what is the objective? We put them all together and bring them close to our heart. The idea is total unity, that we can't all have all the qualities. Some of us have more qualities than others, but we have to recognize our inherent unity. That's one of the messages of these 4 species. So when you made the blessing on it, you were fulfilling a biblical commandment, but at the same time, you're also incorporating and internalizing a very powerful moral lesson. Yeah. With that in mind, if anyone has any questions, you feel free to ask. You can interrupt me. So we're continuing Maimonides' laws of personality development, or as I translated it last week, the laws of proper attitudes. And in the beginning of chapter 1, the first 2 paragraphs, he established the idea that there are all different types of personalities and have different personality traits, one from the other. And now we're going to talk about how you have different extremes. Every trait has extremes. There's a person who never gets angry, for example, and the person who is always prone to anger. In Ethics of the Fathers, that's the earlier source of much of Maimonides' writings, it talks about how there are different qualities of people with regard to anger. There's a person who is very easy to get angry, gets angry right away, and keeps the anger, the grudge for years. That's the lowest level. Then there's the person who gets angry very quickly, but gets rid of it very quickly. You know, you offend someone, he gets upset, and an hour later, he's your best friend. Then there's the person who gets angry takes a long time, but they keep a grudge for a long time. And then there's the person who doesn't get angry, takes a long time for him to get angry, and if it ever happens he gets angry, he gets rid of it right away. That's the ideal. So you have different personality types with regard to anger. What is the right approach? So Maimonides is going to discuss that right now in terms of all traits. The 2 extremes of each trait, which are at a distance from one another, do not reflect a proper path. Extremes are not proper. It is not fitting that a man, and here, as I mentioned last week, when he says man, that doesn't mean man, it means person, but that's the archaic way of saying person, and the translators did it that way. It is not fitting that a person should behave in accordance with these extremes or teach them to himself. What does he mean by that? He shouldn't behave or teach them. There's a difference between behavior and something that you learn. We can engage in all sorts of behaviors that we don't really feel strong about, but we behave that way because it's socially accepted to behave in a certain way. So we say you shouldn't behave that way in extremes, even if you don't really identify with it, it doesn't resonate within you, or teach yourself those extremes and try to inculcate those extremes in your own life. That's not right either way, behaviorally or emotionally. If he finds that his nature leans towards one of the extremes, that's your nature with which you were born, or adapts itself easily to it, it's something that you develop with the passage of time and experiences in life, or if he has learned one of the extremes from others, someone has taught you, it's not just something that's natural for you, but it's something that was taught. We pick up various attitudes from our teachers, our parents, our peers who teach us certain behavior, and if we picked up any of those extremes and acts accordingly, and the focus is on acting accordingly. And I want to just digress for a moment. If you have 2 people, one person has the worst possible attitudes, but doesn't translate them into behavior. They're good people, they behave very well. They do not allow their negative traits to define their behavior. Then you have another person who has the best ideas, advocates the most noble ideas of behavior, but behaves in terrible ways or negative ways. Which of the 2 people would you prefer? You have 2 guesses. You would prefer the first person, the person who has horrible attitudes but good behavior. That is certainly very true in accordance with Jewish ethics, that action counts more than anything else. There are certain people who advocate, especially intellectuals, who advocate the most noble ideas, but in their own lives, their own behaviors are wanting. They don't get along with their spouses, they don't get along with their children, they don't get along with their neighbors, they don't get along with anyone. But they have the right ideas. We can't survive that way. Society, in order for it to survive, the focus has to be placed on behavior. Judaism is a very strong behavior attitude emphasis over the traits. But that doesn't mean the traits are not important for 2 reasons. Number one, they're important in their own right. And number two, if you don't have the right attitudes, there's no guarantee that your behavior will be right. It's an anomaly that someone who has the worst attitudes but has the best behavior. That could happen, but don't count on it. It's not guaranteed. But here, Maimonides is focusing on attitudes, but he's quick to say that it's not just attitude, it's also acting accordingly. So here's a person who leans towards one of the extremes, or he's adapting himself to fit into it, or he has learned this extreme and translates this into action. He should bring himself back to what is proper and walk in the path of the good. This is the straight path. In other words, we're human, so we tend to sometimes veer off course. We're not always traveling in the right direction. Sometimes we make a detour. I remember once I was traveling, the first time I had a GPS, and I was listening to my GPS for a while. Then I thought the GPS is wrong. I have to go in this direction. And I make a turn, I made a turn, and as soon as I made that turn, the GPS says, make the next U-turn. What does the GPS know? This is the first time. And I go another few blocks, make a U-turn. And it happened about 3 or 4 times, then I realized that the GPS was right. And I think the word GPS stands for a God positioning system. Sometimes you think you're going straight, but then there's a God positioning system that tells you, no, you're off course, you have to make a U-turn. So it's not too late. Just because you went off course doesn't mean that you can't come back. And the smarter you are, the easier it is for you to come back. Another story, if you don't mind. There was a young man who grew up in a very religious home, but he veered off course. He became very secularized, and he drifted far away from Jewish practice. And one day he was invited to a wedding at which a relative of his, a distant relative, a great rabbi, would be present. So and they put him right next to this great rabbi. So he says, okay, I'm going to get some real harsh rebuke from this rabbi, because rabbis are known for fire and brimstone. At least that's what he thought. But the rabbi didn't say a word to him. At the end of the meal, the rabbi turns to him and says, oh, now it's coming. He says, I want to ask you a question. Yes? Tell me, I have to buy a horse. I could buy a healthy horse, or I could buy a crippled horse. Which horse is better? And he looks at the rabbi and says, this is the great rabbi, the great philosopher, who's asking me such a ridiculous question. Obviously, a healthy horse is better. So the rabbi says, no, I beg to differ. If I'm traveling on a road and I veer off course, if I have a healthy horse, it could take me miles off course. But if I have a crippled horse, how far could it stray? So the young man says, Rabbi, you're still wrong. Because the healthy horse, when it recognizes that it veered off course, can gallop right back on the right road very quickly, whereas the crippled horse may not be able to make it back. And the rabbi looks at him and says, I think you're the healthy horse. It's time for you to come back. So yes, we do veer off course very often. So Maimonides says, come back. You can always return to the right path. Just recognize that the right path is in the center. It's in between the two extremes. The straight path, he continues in paragraph 4. The straight path. What is the straight path? This involves discovering the midpoint temperament of each and every trait that people possess, or man possesses within his personality. This refers to the trait which is equidistant from either of the extremes without being close to either of them. In other words, you have to figure out what are the extremes. You know, the word extreme is a very limiting word. We use it politically. This is an extreme this, so this is the extreme that. But everything is relative. You know, you're talking about in North Korea, a moderate would be someone who says, let's not destroy America entirely, let's destroy 3/4 of it. Oh, that's a moderate. because everything is relative in our language today. So you have to really try to figure out what are the real extremes, not what you may think is an extreme, but what your neighbors tell you is an extreme. Some people will say that if you do anything that's consistent with religion, people will call you a religious fanatic. I've seen people who are barely observant who are called fanatics by someone who is less observant. So you can't use the words extreme very lightly. You have to really gauge what is a true extreme. Therefore, the early sages, when he says early sages, he means the rabbis of the Talmud, instructed a person to evaluate his traits, to calculate them, and to direct them along the middle path. I'll leave the rest of the sentence out for a moment. In other words, you have to evaluate yourself. People have to use self-judgment. You can't rely on others telling you what's right and what's wrong. Sometimes they help you, but you have to be able to judge yourself. You have to evaluate what are the extremes and what is the middle point. And then he says, so that he will be sound of body. The words of body are in squiggles, whatever they call those kinds of parentheses, which means that it's not necessarily part of the original text. In certain editions of Maimonides, those words are missing, because it sounds like he's saying that if you get to the middle path, you'll be healthy, your body will be healthier. And there's some good argument for that. Maimonides was a doctor, and wherever he can give you advice to be healthy, he might be saying to us that if you have healthy attitudes, it will also affect your physical health. And while that's true, it's not certain that that's what Maimonides meant in this particular section. That's why it's in parentheses. For example, he gives an example of anger. He should not be wrathful, easily angered. That's a negative trait. That's an extreme. Any little thing that happens that doesn't go your way and you explode, that's a very unhealthy trait. That's one extreme. What's the other extreme? Nor be like the dead, without feeling. Some people just don't feel, and it's not because they're so virtuous that they don't get angry. They're just totally insensitive. They have no ability to express emotions. It's tragically, people who go through trauma sometimes end up not being able to express their emotions. I know Holocaust survivors that couldn't cry for years. They couldn't emote. Now that's not a personality flaw, that's a illness. That's something that's very tragic, that their bodies have become so numbed that they can't express emotion. That's an extreme. If a person is dead, it doesn't feel any emotion. Rather, he should adopt an intermediate course. What does that mean? I.e., he should display anger only when the matter is serious enough to warrant it, in order to prevent the matter from recurring. You see someone doing something that's dangerous, life-threatening, and you rebuke the person. Why are you doing this? This could harm us. Someone who's smoking in public, for example, like that's the only example that comes to mind right away, and you tell them, you get angry at them, you say, why are you smoking? It's unhealthy. So that's a justifiable anger. And the reason why you're getting angry is not a way of expressing your opposition to that person, it's preventative. You see, in society today, and this is very much related to what's going on in Israel, the idea is that if someone attacks you, you retaliate as revenge. That's not the Jewish attitude. You don't take revenge is wrong. No matter how bad the person is that harmed you, revenge is wrong. That's one of the commandments that Maimonides is going to be discussing in this section. So then what justifiable reaction could you have? Not revenge, but self-defense. If what you're doing is going to defend this from recurring, then it's justified. But if it's not going to defend your interests, and it's not going to stop it from recurring, then it's not justified. So Maimonides is saying that the anger is justified because you're trying to prevent that matter from recurring. So that extreme, that intermediate course is legitimate. Similarly, he should not desire anything other than that which the body needs and cannot exist without. As states in Proverbs, the righteous man eats to satisfy his soul. He's talking about another area of extremes. There's an extreme where a person indulges without any restraint, and the person who self-mortifies, who doesn't take care of his bodily needs at all, who just neglects his body totally. Those are two extremes. So what's the middle path? The middle path is that you take care of your body. You don't indulge in a gluttonous way. You don't become a hedonist. But at the same time, you don't neglect your body. You take good care of your health. Maimonides, again, the Dr. Maimonides, is emphasizing the importance of maintaining good health, and he's going to devote more attention to that later on in this section. Also, and in terms of another two extremes, the person who becomes a workaholic, whose focus in life is making more money, and they'll kill themselves in order to make money, that's one extreme. And there's the person who doesn't do anything, who stays idle. Also, he should not labor in his business except to gain what he needs for immediate use. As the Psalms state, a little is good for the righteous man. In other words, don't go to extremes in trying to make a lot of money in order to become wealthy and accumulate wealth, and therefore kill yourself as a workaholic. But at the same time, you don't neglect your needs, and you work gainfully in order to take care of your needs. Now, he doesn't mention another possibility, someone who wants to make a lot of money so they can do more good for others. If that's your motive, then that's included in this. Maimonides is not giving you an exhaustive list of all the positive reasons for people to want to make money. One of them is to survive. That's the basic one that everyone has, but some people might want to make money and not retire because they want to do more good for the world. That's a legitimate and positive, that's not an extreme. Again, another example, he should not be overly stingy, nor spread his money about. When talking about charity, here's an interesting part of Jewish morals concerning charity. A person makes, let's say, let's not say $1 million, not too many of us make $1 million a year. Let's say a person makes $100,000 a year and they want to give charity. How much should they give? So Jewish law says you should give 10% of your net worth of what you make. So if after taxes you have $80,000, you should give $8,000 to charity. If you want to be more generous, give 20%, but not more. Good. Not more. There are some loopholes to that law. There are some loopholes that can allow you to give more. But what's the rationale for that? Why not give more? Because if a person is going to start giving more, they'll come to a point where they will depend on charity. So it's like, if we want to be charitable and I'll give everything I have to you, and then you give everything you have to me, we're going to be going back and forth. It's not going to do anyone any good. You have to be charitable, but charity has its limits because people have a need to take care of their own interests, and that should not be dismissed. So he should not be overly stingy, someone who says, I don't want to share with what I have. I know of people who will say, you want me to give charity? It's my money. I work so hard for it. Well, Maimonides doesn't say this, but there's a belief in Judaism that the money that you give to charity is not really your money. It was determined ahead of time that this money should go to a needy person or a needy cause. You're the trustee. God says, instead of me giving it directly to Joe, I'm going to let you be my partner in my giving of what belongs to Joe through you. So you will become a partner in my charity. So you are really a trustee. God entrusts you with the money that really belongs to someone else, but you have the right to determine how much you want to give and to whom you want to give. That leeway we have. But whether or not it should be given, that's already not your choice. That was given to you as an obligation by God. So you shouldn't be overly stingy nor spread his money about, but you should give charity according to his capacity and lend to the needy as is fitting. He adds about lending, because Maimonides discusses in another place that the highest form of charity, he goes through 8 levels of charity, and he says the highest form of charity where you provide the person the means to sustain himself without depending on charity. And how do you do that? By giving them a loan. And also sometimes a loan is a hidden way of giving charity to make it more respectful, more dignified. The person doesn't feel he's a basket case and he's a charity case. So you say, I'm lending you the money whenever you have the means to return it. But in your mind, you're really giving it away. And if he doesn't return it, you're fine with that. But that's another higher level of giving charity. Another example of not going to extremes, he should not be overly elated and laugh excessively. Happy-go-lucky person who's always laughing, it doesn't take anything in life seriously, nor be sad and depressed in spirit. Obviously, there are people who are depressed because of chemical imbalances. They're clinically depressed, and that's a different story. But there are certain people who are just always looking for the negative, and they're always depressed. That's a negative trait. It's not a question of whether it's right. It's not a question of it's a good or bad. It's right or wrong. There was a great rabbi who once said that there's no place in the Torah where it says, thou shalt not be depressed. There's no such commandment. But there's no commandment that will be affected by you when you are depressed. It'll prevent you from doing good, and it might even cause you to become weakened. Your resistance to negativity will be weakened, and you will become very vulnerable. So it's not a commandment, don't be depressed, but it does lead to the violation of other commandments. So Maimonides is saying, don't be depressed. Now Maimonides himself, if you remember in the class when he lost his brother, he was depressed for a full year. So was he listening to his own advice? You know, it's easier to talk about things than it is to practice them. It takes a lot of effort and a person to change his personality. When a person is depressed, and it seems like Maimonides was clinically depressed for that year until he finally recovered and produced most of his greatest writings and were produced afterwards. Rather, he should be quietly happy at all times. What does he mean by quietly? Not just running around laughing and mocking everyone. Yes, humor is very good, but you can't engage in public humor all the time. The friendly countenance. A person should always try to be friendly because, I forgot who it is who said this, but a great rabbi once said that your face is public property. What happens inside of you is your business. But when you go out in public and you frown and you look depressed, you're causing others to look that way and to respond that way. So your face is public property. Make sure that you're always looking, as much as humanly possible, always looking friendly, the smile on your face. And this applies with regard to his other traits. This path is the path of the wise. Every man whose traits are intermediate and equally balanced can be called a wise man. What he's saying is, and he's soon going to qualify, and we'll start with paragraph 5, a person who carefully examines his behavior and therefore deviates slightly from the mean to either side is called pious. What he's saying over here, there are 2 categories of humans. There's the wise person and the pious person. The wise person is the one who always finds the golden mean, who always finds the middle of the road. By assessing what is an extreme on this side and what is an extreme on that side, what the real extremes are, and finding the middle ground. That's a wise person. You need wisdom to do that. You can't do it without wisdom. But then there's a higher level, the level referred to as the pious person. The pious person is a wise person, but then they say, you know what? I'm going to go a little bit in one direction more than the other direction, because that's a better, more noble way of living. And that's the example he gives in paragraph 5. What is implied? And he gives the example of pride, of ego. One who shuns pride and turns to the other extreme and carries himself lowly or humbly is called pious. This is the quality of piety, because piety is defined by the Talmud and Maimonides as well as someone who goes beyond the letter of the law. While the law mandates certain types of behavior, it doesn't mean that you stick to that level and you can't go beyond that. Because what the law gives you the bare minimum. The law gives you the common denominator of all humanity. We could all aspire to reach the level of normalcy. But sometimes we have to go beyond normal. Sometimes, just like you can go beyond normal, beneath normalcy, you can act foolish, you can act like an idiot. There's also acting beyond normalcy. That's the person who's not just wise, who knows the middle, but goes beyond because they want to fortify their moral standing. So he gives the example of the person who carries himself humbly, but that's not the middle of the road, because he's going beneath, he's going further away, not beneath, he's going further away from arrogance than the mean. However, if he separates himself only to the extent that he reaches the mean and displays humility, he is called wise. If a person is arrogant, you should note, Maimonides is telling that person, you're not pious and you're not wise. Arrogance cannot be a wise person. So if you see someone who won a Nobel Prize and is brilliant, but is arrogant, we wouldn't call that person wise. Now, when society today would say that person must be a genius, he won the Nobel Prize. But in Maimonides' terminology, that person is not wise at all. That person is a fool because of their arrogance. This is the quality of wisdom if the person just has a modicum of humility. But if he goes beyond that, he's called pious. The same applies with regard to other character traits. The pious of the early generations would bend their temperaments from the intermediate path towards either of the two extremes. It depends on the extremes. For some traits, they would veer towards the final extreme, for others towards the first extreme. This is referred to as behavior beyond the measure of the law, as I just mentioned before. Now, the Hebrew expression, which they translate as beyond the measure of the law, that's not a precise translation. The precise translation is within the system of law. There's a difference between beyond and within. When I say something is beyond, it means it went further away. When I say something is within, I'm not further away, I'm deeper. If you practice the law, which means basic behavior, just by virtue of your behavior, which is the most important thing, of course, but if that's what it is, then it's not personal, then it's not internalized. When you go beyond the law, what does that show? When you do more than what is required of you, that you get to the spirit of the law. There's the letter of the law, which is the most important for behavior, but then there's also the spirit of the law. The pious person gets more than just the letter of the law, he gets the spirit of the law. It begins to resonate, it becomes internalized, it becomes part of you. It's not just something you do, it's something that you are. And then he goes on to say, we are commanded to walk in these intermediate paths, and they are good and straight paths, as Deuteronomy states, and you shall walk in his ways. Now here it gets into another area, which we'll have to leave for next week, but I just want to start it and whet your appetite a little bit. Maimonides until now didn't mention a word about commandments. He's just saying what is the right attitude, what is the wrong attitude, what's the in-between attitude, what's the pious attitude. Nowhere did he mention about a commandment. Now Maimonides' code of law, as I mentioned it repeatedly, is based on his enumeration of commandments. And whenever Maimonides discusses a matter of Jewish law, he always prefaces it, this is what the Torah commands us. Now let me explain what it means. Here, Maimonides reverses the order. First, he starts off talking about the laws, about the proper attitudes, the different levels, wise and pious. And then, and this is the end of paragraph 5 and 6, he cites the biblical basis for these attitudes. Why is he doing it in that reversed order? That we'll have to discuss next week. Give you a week to ponder it if you want. So Maimonides, in short, has established that there is a golden mean. That's what all philosophers agreed with that, all religions agree with that. I don't think there's anyone who says, no, we have to, well, maybe there are some people, but there are individuals who we have to go to extremes no matter what the extremes are. We call that fanaticism. But that's not what most religions advocate. But Maimonides is going a step further. He's saying it's not just that you can't go to extremes. You have to know what the extremes are in order for you to get to the middle. That's point number one. Point number two is going to the middle, the golden mean, as it's sometimes referred to, is not necessarily the ideal. It's ideal if you compare it to the extremes, but it's not the ideal. The ideal is the pious person who knows how to go a little bit beyond the mean and engages in what is called within the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, and therefore behaves in a way that is a little bit more extreme than the mean. Any questions? It means everything is so clear that there's no... Rabbis thrive on questions. That doesn't mean they know the answers. It just means that people are thinking. Yes?
Where do you buy that fruit?
Where do you buy it? You go to Walmart. They have it in any major Jewish community. Well, you can get it locally also. There are people who sell it. You wouldn't believe how much, I don't even know how much this costs. I got this as a gift from one of my sons. But this one over here would probably shock you if you knew what the range would be. Want to try to take a guess? I don't know exactly the price, but I know what it certainly didn't cost.
No.
Okay, it's several $100s.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
And after the holiday...
I'm going to buy a tree.
After the holiday, you know how much it's going to be worth? How much it's going to depreciate? It's going to go to zero. Because it can't be used for anything. In the olden days, they used to use it to make jam. But I was told that we shouldn't try to make jam out of it because this fruit comes from Italy, and they use it for perfumes, and they spray it with pesticides, so many pesticides that it wouldn't be safe for you to use it for anything. So it's only used for the holiday, and then we can't use it anymore. But that sounds pretty extreme. We're talking about extremes. You're willing to spend a few $100s. But if you think about it, every time you fulfill a commandment of the Torah, you're developing a relationship with God. Isn't that worth? It's worth all the money in the world. We don't have all the money in the world, but it's worth that. I'll give you an example. If someone would tell you, how much money would you be willing to get to give away your child? Well, if you're normal, you'd say, no money in the world. $1 billion? You wouldn't give, if Bill Gates would say, I'll give you $1 billion if I can take your child from you. There's no price, because it's your child. When we look at a commandment, we're looking at it as a relationship with God, like a child to his father or to his mother. And that relationship is priceless. The only thing is that God knows we're living in a world where we don't have all the money in the world. So he's making it cheap. $300 is cheap. It's much less than all the money in the world. So if you look at it that way, it's not too expensive. Now, there's much cheaper. You can get one for $20 also. But
hold it over to next year?
It probably could if you had the right climate, but it wouldn't work in Buffalo. It'll shrivel by the time. I guess if you put it in a climate-controlled environment, you could leave it for the next year. Any other questions? Okay, everyone should have a good week and a happy holiday. This holiday lasts for 9 days. Actually, it's a composite of 2 or 3 different holidays all in one, sandwiched together in one. But the common denominator is that this is called the season of our rejoicing. Yes?
Maybe you could explain the holiday.
Okay, the first holiday is Sukkah, so Sukkot, when we dwell in booths. Because when God took us out of Egypt and we traveled through the desert for 40 years, He housed us in booths. That's one reason given. Another reason given, we were surrounded by heavenly clouds that protected us. So we commemorate that, and we live that experience by dwelling in booths. We eat our meals in these huts called sukkahs. And the message is, the primary message is that God protects us. There's a belief that God is a creator of the universe, but then He has more important things to do than to take care of our daily needs. The holiday of Sukkot says, no, that's not true. God is involved and He protects us, and we depend on His protection. And especially the Jewish people realize that the fact that we survived these thousands of years of persecution, of attempts to destroy us, shows that God has protected us. So we have 1 week of the year when we emphasize that. Then the next holiday is called Shemini Atzeret. That's like after 7 days of celebration, God says to the people, let's celebrate one more day modestly, and this will be for me and you, God says, as if we're God's best friend and He wants to celebrate with us for one more day. The next day is called Simchat Torah. That's the day we conclude the reading of the 5 books of Moses. And in Judaism, whenever you conclude something, you celebrate. We don't have to look for too many excuses to celebrate. They used to say, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. That sums up in a very low-level explanation for the holidays. But we celebrate when we conclude reading the 5 books of Moses, and it's considered to be the most joyous day in the Jewish calendar. So that, in a nutshell, is what the holidays are about. Yes?
I have a silly question. The sukkah is supposed to have sort of barely a roof. There should be openings.
The sukkah has covered with plants,
Yeah.
with branches. Yeah.
But so that you can see the sky, the cloud, God protect it. What do you do when it rains?
When it rains?
See the sukkah with umbrellas?
Okay, according to Jewish law, the basic level of Jewish law, when it rains, you don't have to sit in the sukkah. If it's uncomfortable, you're exempted from it. But the pious people who want to go beyond, say, you know, we love sitting in the sukkah, so they'll sit even in the rain. They'll hope for it to stop raining, but they'll still sit in the sukkah. But it's not required.